Development is a term we use for what our bodies make us do. So when we're born with not many skills, and biologically we're just compelled to keep developing. So development maybe is another word for growing. Now, when we talk about development, we don't just mean our physical selves, we also mean our minds and our mental selves and our ability. The third area is really to engage in social activity. When we talk about children being on track, what we're meaning is that they're doing what their age mates are doing. They're knowing how to do the tasks that most children their age are interested in and motivated to do. Right? So we think of infants learning to walk. We think of 2.5-year-olds needing to wander off because they're so curious about what's over there. We think of 4- and 5-year-olds delighting in saying, "I did it," and really having a sense of mastery. Now, the "I did it" is interesting because it's not just "I did it," but it's also, "Hey world, look at me, I did it." So there's a social connection that's very embedded in development. So body, mind, social engagement. We know that from birth to 5, the brain is in a process of very rapid growth, just as the body is. And so young children are learning probably more in those 5 years than most of us learn in a decade or maybe more. They're very, very engaged with their environment. They're exposed to new things all the time, and they have to manage the amount of stimulation that they receive in a way that is very taxing on their resources. Right? What makes it so important is not just there's so much to learn, but I don't have a deep bench to pull forth to help me learn. And that's why we talk about these first 5 years as so critical, both in a positive way, but also in a vulnerability way. When the first 5 years children are not supported, are not provided the adult mediation that allows them to pause and try again, they often become overwhelmed. When there's incredible stress, or what we call toxic stress, then children are often set off course in their development because they don't have the resources to keep going and to manage the stress. Normal is not one set. Some children walk at 10 months, some children walk at 14 months. But there are these markers or milestones that we just come to expect because the majority of children do it. So professionals talk about, "Oh, he looks like 2.5." And what we're looking at is these series of developmental tasks that are happening, but also happening in cooperation with each other. So walking and exploring and talking and showing and describing, all those things become part of the developmental picture. But what we're really looking at when we talk about screening is not just are children meeting certain milestones in physical development, cognitive development, emotional development, but we're also looking at something very important called organization. So when we talk about development, we talk about children getting organized. And organized is no different for children than adults. When we feel organized, we're putting the parts together so that it works, right? And again, that just as walking is a process of learning to get organized, as children get older, they have to organize their experiences. So we're really looking at how children are doing that. Are they organizing what they need to do, what they've learned, so that they get to patterns that work for them? In attachment research, we talk about young babies learning about expectancies and strategies. This is just a good example of organization. They learn what to expect, and they learn what to do to trigger what they want. So babies learn that when the parent comes in the room and smiles at them, they smile back. And quickly they learn that if I smile first, they can get you to smile. Now that's a good example of a small step in organization. I got it. I know how to make it work. So what we want pediatricians and child protection workers and community professionals to do is to look at the child and really say, is development working for this child? Is development working so that he can keep learning? Is development working so that she can stay connected to her caregivers? Is development working so that she has a sense of delight in what she's doing? Development is orderly, and this is very important for child protection workers because the children that they work with are not having orderly lives. So by orderly, we don't mean that every toy is in the right place, but we do mean that there's reliable, predictable experiences. So the child can really start to say, this is how it works. I get up in the morning and this is what we do. I go to bed at night and this is how we do it. So there's a sense of order rather than chaos. Now this is terribly important because most of our families who are involved in child protection experience a lot of chaos for lots of different reasons. And that affects their child's energy level to figure out how things work. The second thing is it's cumulative. So we know that development builds on itself. So the infant learns things that the toddler learns in a better way, and the preschooler learns in a really better way. We talk about connecting, exploring, mastery as the task, and each step builds on the next so that the child really develops a mass of knowledge that allows them to function. At least for humans, we cannot do it alone. If there isn't an adult around or adults around to help the child to engage in this interacting with the environment, the child cannot go forward. So the transaction is about what the parent brings to the child, and the child brings to the parent, and the parent brings to the child, and the child brings to the parent. One of the important things to know in development is that when your child is doing well, the parent feels really competent. And when your child is struggling, the parent doesn't. And so each impacts the other. And the process is a continual building on not only skills, but relationship trust. So the parent is the one who stays the course, who says, that's too bad, who says, you can do it, who says, let's take a break and we'll try again tomorrow. So the parent really is a critical part of development. In the work that child protection staff do, the parent is often profoundly compromised in what we call parental capacity. So parental capacity is just the mom job or the dad job. It's just knowing how to keep your focus on the child. And a lot of what happens in maltreatment is that parents are distracted or overwhelmed or unable to stay focused on the child. And so even before the actual neglect or abuse happens, often we're already seeing struggles because that parental capacity is diminished and the child can't stay as organized as her peers. Disorganized development is simply when it's not working. So the child is spending a lot of energy trying to do things, but the pieces aren't going together. So often what happens in disorganized development is that the child looks like they're doing some of the things that their peers are, but in some ways it's creating mayhem, it's sending the wrong signals, it's causing them a lot of distress. So we want professionals to be looking at what the child is doing, how is it feeling for the child as he's doing it, but also how is it working for everyone else in the social context so that it's going together. For children with maltreatment, we want to focus on adaptation because often they adapt to very difficult circumstances because that's what they have. That's what they have to do. So a lot of times what look like behavior problems, he did it on purpose, isn't. It's really the child having to adapt even in ways that outsiders may think is maladaptive, not working, but it's really demonstrating this is the best this child can do under the circumstances. Toxic stress I describe as too much for too long with too little help. And when there's too much for too long, children get defeated and their development starts to go awry. When there's too little adult support, children get defeated and despairing. Often children who are defeated and despairing will be mistaken for angry or defiant or oppositional or not listening or doing it on purpose. And adults really have to think carefully about what it is that the child is trying to manage and make sure that there's adult mediation. So a lot of what the child protection worker should be doing is looking not just at the difficult child, but looking at how the parent is helping or not helping the child, because that's where behavior problems are created. So when child protection workers are in the field or when they're supporting foster parents, which they must do, the team is looking for how much the child's developmental energy is going forward as opposed to getting stymied or stuck. So for infants, we look at, is the child connecting? Is the child interested in their environment? Is the child starting to be delighted by other people coming in? Does the child seem reasonably wary but also reasonably curious? Is the child interested in toys? And is the child interested in other children? Is the infant engaging in the world in a way that says, this pleases me, which we often see in the child's smile, but also this, I'm pleasing to you. So the infant is starting to have a sense that there's a relationship that's important, right? And that these other people have meaning to me. Now, infants in foster care have been removed from their first parent, so they often can seem more disinterested or wary. So interest and pleasure is really important. For toddlers, we really want to see that their exploring is enjoyable but also organized. So toddlers get hard for foster parents because they're impulsive, they run, they often run into places that aren't so safe. They need to stop when you call to them. So we want to make sure that the toddler is using that exploring energy in ways that are helping him learn, but also helping him connect. When toddlers are too reckless, when they're too danger-seeking, or when they're too timid and they're too inhibited, we want to be concerned. We want to see language coming because we know that as children get language, then their behaving and their squawking diminish. So when you can say, I want this, you don't have to cry, you don't have to kick and scream. So language is really important. For preschoolers, we want to see child protection workers really looking for mastery. We want to see more organization. We want to see more intention. We want to see the child having purpose, right? We don't want to have the random kind of exploring that toddlers do, but really have intention and delight that I did it. And we want to see that preschoolers can start to tolerate what we call distress. We want to see that when they can't get something to work, they don't fall apart excessively, but they can sort of try again. We want to see that they can be helped, by the adults in their lives. And we want to see that they're starting to do what we call the pre-learning skills, the executive functions, patience, focus, attention, problem solving, shifting attention to something else, all those things that we just often take for granted. Mental health, I think, has confused a lot of people, and we need to do a better job at helping them get unconfused. So in early childhood, mental health interventions are not about fixing the child, but really removing the roadblocks to development. And so we want to partner with child protection as much as possible to do a couple of things. One is, anytime they have a child that feels confusing to them or to the foster parent, we're willing to partner to help them know how organized or disorganized this child's behavior is, what are the adaptations that the child has made, and how can we understand that? Because moving forward is really the child's strength. The second thing we want to do is be available to them to help them understand better the effect of the parent-child relationship. So since child protection is about a parent not doing the parent job, we want to support you in learning how the parent job went amiss and how the parent job can be repaired. And that's really important because you have to parent this child. And a lot of times parents get into trouble because they parent how I was parented, or they parent how I think you're supposed to be acting, and they're missing this child. That's especially important with children with neurocognitive differences, children with developmental delays, children with impairments because of extreme stress. They need a different kind of parenting that their parents don't know. So instead of blaming them for not doing it, we have to help them learn it. Mental health can help. The third way that we can help in the birth to 3 population is that we can actually work with the child. We can work with the child and the foster parent. We can work with the child and the parent, the grandparents, adoptive parents. We repair relationship synchrony. That's what we're about. So when you have a child who can't attain relationship synchrony, let us help. Children need partners. So the worker has to come in understanding that relationships matter, because sometimes the relationship they will have with the child will be one of the ones that matter. So that gets us to another term that we call buffering. And buffering is like insulation. When there's toxic stress, something needs to protect you. So adults buffer children. Adults scaffold children with supplemental support. Adults provide something that reduces the impact of the stress and strain. Adults literally serve as a mediator so that the hit isn't so great for children. And for that to happen, children have to let adults be important, and adults have to act like they're important. So it's terribly important that foster parents realize that children need them not just to follow their directions or eat the meals they're giving, but to buffer them. Child protection workers need to buffer them. Early childhood staff need to think of themselves as buffers. That way we can build a community of protection for these most vulnerable children. I know that child protection caseloads are very challenging, and I also know that many of the parents bring very, very complicated difficulties to their behavior. What I would like to urge child protection workers to think about is that when you can focus on the child and really identify a way that the parent can be more connected to the child, then you'll feel like you're actually doing something. And when you can help that parent see something about their child and realize that their drug use or their partnering or their fighting is scaring their child, and you can stay focused on how do you think that's like for your child in a way that allows the parent to feel like she's doing a better job, you'll go away with a tiny bit of hope and enthusiasm. Focus on the child. Too many times we're focusing on adult behavior and we're not focusing on protecting children or helping children develop. I remember early in my work, one of my young colleagues said to me, "We're not going to cure this child, are we?" And that was exactly right. We're not going to put them back to factory settings. We're not going to start from scratch. He's going to have the impact of these experiences. And what we as a community need to do is understand where that came from and then help him keep learning so those patterns that were formed under duress don't stay duress causing. So is there hope? Absolutely. I mean, the reason that we are so passionate about birth to 3 is that the sooner that we can intervene, the less damage occurs. And the more we understand how early development happens, the more skilled we are at intervening at later years. So much of my work is based on how young children learn, and that includes school-age children, adolescents, adults, because we're just not that complicated. I feel really hopeful because as we identify these basic principles that are so profoundly important, we know how to use them in subsequent interactions with children. And I also feel hopeful because most children really want adults to like them. Even the children who signal the opposite really want to be part of a community, part of relationships. So as long as we can be consistently kind, even as we are clear and predictable and orderly and expectant of growth, then I think children can get better. So let me give you an example of how we work with young children. So I'm thinking of a 3-year-old boy who's living in a foster home. This is the second time that he's left his primary caregiver. In this case, it's his mother. His mother has pretty significant mental health problems made worse by drug use. So his experience of her in his 3.5 years is on again, off again. Sometimes she can be very attentive to him, and other times she's very unavailable to him. So he's a child we might describe as disorganized. And he came into this new foster home at 3 years, 2 months, and immediately was described by his foster parent as a tyrant, and attributions were made about him that he was disrespectful and he was difficult and he always had to get his way. And nobody paused enough to say, I wonder why this boy has to work so hard to take care of himself. I wonder why this boy is so wary of anyone helping him. Now, those are the kinds of questions that we want immediately to ask. So as I worked with this child, my job was to understand how frightened he was and how fear can make you protect yourself. But it was also to help the foster parent, who was well-meaning but totally out of sync with this child, rearrange her attitude and see him as a 3.5-year-old boy rather than a threat to her family and life. The other thing we had to do was be really clear with the child protection worker that the case plan had to help this mother with her mental health needs. and see whether she was willing to stop using drugs. Because as long as she used drugs, she really couldn't have the parent capacity that was necessary to repair what already had done. All three jobs were very important. In this case, the mom was able to get off drugs, but still had a lot of vulnerability. The foster parent was able to stop being so mad at this boy, and he was able to become a more vulnerable and gentle little boy with lots of strengths, because growing up with his mother probably meant he'd have to take care of himself a lot of the time. And the family was able to understand their family members' mental health needs in a way that allowed the county to believe that there was enough buffering that he could go back home.